So back for another episode of the Cosmic Bridge podcast with me, Michael Hansen, founder of Growth Genie. And today we have on Sam Jacobs. Sam is a friend of mine. He's also the CEO of Pavilion, which is a community of go-to-market leaders. Go-to-market is a bit of a buzz phrase, but essentially it means sales and marketing leaders. I'm actually a part of the community, highly recommend it. Sam puts out really great tips around sales and marketing, but as you know, if you follow this podcast, we're not going to be talking kind of sales tactics or strategy, but we're going to be talking about some of the things that are happening in Sam's personal life, spiritually, emotionally, professionally, and obviously that does cross over into the business day to day as well. But yeah, really excited to have Sam on the show. As I was talking about with Sam before, the reason I invited Sam onto the show is not because of his amazing sales and marketing and even business advice, but Sam actually wrote a book called Kind Folks Finish First, and he talks a lot about the role of values in business as well. And Sam, I actually wanted to kick off the show with a difficult question. I always start with the hard questions, but I saw a LinkedIn post you put out, which I thought was quite interesting. You said, here's an easy life hack to get you out of that rut. Start with the assumption that you might be the problem, which I thought was great, quite stoic philosophy there. But what I wanted to ask is, how did you learn this? Because obviously we all learn this the hard way when we realize that we're the problem. So what are some of the times where you realize this?
Well, there's a book called The Outward Mindset by this company called the Arbinger Institute, and they're actually partners of Pavilion. But they were partners of Pavilion, so I started shilling for their books. It was I read their books and decided I want them to be partners of Pavilion. So, the first book I read was called Leadership and Self-Deception, and then I read The Outward Mindset. And the only book I haven't read of theirs is called The Anatomy of Peace. But to your point about Stoicism or Marcus Aurelius, or really, there's a body of spiritual knowledge that touches on the same veins that I'm exposed to, that a lot of people are exposed to, whether it's Eckhart Tolle or Marianne Williamson or whomever. And so I read it in that book, but I guess the point of it is, and I mean, for me personally, I mean, there's any number of examples. I think. I talk about this a decent amount sometimes on podcasts, but I've heard like Sam Harris talk about the idea that I think there's a logical perspective that free will is actually logically impossible, given how motor functions in the body work, and given a lot of things about how the logical implications of how the universe interoperates. But the point of starting with the idea that you might be the problem is really the most, it's an empowering statement, because what it means is that you have more control over your life than you think. And that's for me, again, part of what I wrote in the book, there's a section called You Are Not a Victim. And it's just the idea. It's the idea that you have a lot more influence and control over the outcomes of your life than maybe you think or would give yourself credit for. At the same time that, I also talk about how people are part of the market and part of the universe, and we're all interconnected. But, and then the other thing I would just say is, through years and years of experiences on the planet and with other people, I even have an example from yesterday where, I just think we tend to see, they've read a bunch of books, and Danny Kahneman talks about it, and I read a book called The Status Game recently, but the point of it is we see everybody else in two dimensions, and everybody, and it's, I guess it emerges from this kind of this dissonance in our minds and in evolution between the fact that we like to be alone, but we also like to be with people, and they're always these competing tensions. But the point is that we see everybody else in two dimensions, and we see ourselves in three dimensions. And so we have lots of reasons why we are imperfect and why it's excusable, but we give far fewer leeway to the other people in our lives. And we assume, one of the other favorite phrases I have is, never assume conspiracy when simple incompetence will suffice. So we assume that the world's out to get us, but that we are the noble victims that are just, suffering from the unfortunate arrows of fate and circumstance. And the point of start with the idea that, you might be the problem is, well, what if you reverse that? And what if you looked at yourself from the outside? And what if and the point that the Arbinger Institute makes is, hey, let's just assume that we're all humans. We're all trying our best. So if we were to start from the idea that we might be the problem, where would that lead us? And so, for example, yesterday, the reason I was in Charlotte was because I had a dispute with the possible sponsor of Pavilion. And I won't go into the machinations of it, but it became pretty heated over email, and it was getting kind of nasty and litigious. And we decided mutually, hey, why don't we just meet in person and see if we can figure this out? And in the course of sitting across the table from this person over lunch, I did what I just recommended other people do. And I said, maybe he's right, and maybe we weren't acting the right way. And I can see what he's saying, and I can see why that's frustrating. And we came to an amicable conclusion as a consequence of saying, you know what, I contribute to the circumstances of my life. It's not, nobody's out to get me. And again, the best part of that is that it's empowering. The best part of it is that there's something you can do about it. The problem with assuming that all of the world is against you, or that you don't have, or that it's not your fault, is that means it's not your fault. That means that you don't really control what happens in your life, and that you're being bounced around like a ping pong and somebody else is hitting the buttons. So long-winded rambling answer to to your first
No,
question, Mike.
it was a great answer. I actually liked a lot what you said, because it's reframing that this is actually a good thing, because you may look at that statement and be like, oh, this is tough. But actually, if that's the case, then it means you have a lot more control of your life, like you're saying.
It's like it's a muscle that you develop, which I am working on. We talk about like peacetime and wartime, and I know you and I were talking at the beginning, I don't know what, before we were recording potentially, but about this year, 2023, and the challenges of being in the tech economy in 2023, anywhere around it, whether you're selling, I mean, both of our companies probably sell into companies that have raised venture capital financing or some kind of growth financing. And if that financing dries up and those companies dry up, there's a ripple effect that affects everybody, including you and me. And I remember how this year started, and this year started on New Year's Eve, December 31st, 2022, and I logged into bill.com and I saw our accounts payable, and it was such a big number, and I couldn't, and I freaked out, and I like texted my head of finance. I was like, what the hell's going on? And that set the tone for what 2023 would be like. But the point is that, we've done a layoff this year. We did a reorg, and it's been the most challenging year to be a CEO. But I will tell you that, that phrase, it sounds silly or cliche, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, but it really is true. The people that are running business now, again, you have to make sure that it doesn't kill you. So because once you're dead, that's forever. But if it doesn't kill you, then there's going to be a whole class of entrepreneurs, a whole class of CEOs and founders that did figure out that maybe they needed 5 people to do what they thought they needed 10 people to do, and that they did figure out how to operate more profitably and efficiently, and they did figure out how to build their company and their lives in such a way that they weren't sprinting towards some final destination that needed to be 6 months ahead of them, because if not, they were going to run out of energy to pursue it. And so and Pavilion is an example of that, where I feel like I've become a much, much better CEO. And I will be grateful, even though there have been multiple moments, even last night, multiple moments this year, many times, many days, many hours, where I have had, my heart has been beating so fast, because I have had existential, fight or flight reactions to certain business circumstances, and thinking, just being scared. And I know, to your point, I will be grateful for this. I will be, and not in like 50 years. Like, I'll be grateful for it by a year from now. The end of summer 2024. I bet Pavilion will be absolutely rocking and rolling, and I will be so grateful that we took the steps that we're taking now to course correct and to improve how we run the business.
So what do you do in those situations? You said you're going to fight or flight mode, you're running a business, the economy is the way it is, like things are going wrong left, right, and center. And I think initially you do have that instinct reaction that's fight or flight, panicking, what's going wrong? Is my business going to survive? Can I pay my staff? Like you're saying, accounts payable, all these things. What do you do in those situations? How do you calm yourself down?
What I've been doing is there's a lot. First of all, there's like way smarter people than me that will tell you what to do in those situations. And so one of the things I would recommend is you listen to The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle on Audible. You listen, don't read it, listen to it, because he reads it. And he's like I don't know if he's Danish or, he's sort of like Nordic of some descent, but he has this very alluring accent, and, it's very mystical sounding, and it helps. And the point that he makes is that time, I mean, you said it's called the cosmic bridge. So you did it, Michael, not me.
Yeah.
That time, what does he call it? I forget. Psychological time is what he calls it, right? So the point of the power of now is that everything that is in our minds is completely illusory, right? There is no past, there is no present. I mean, no future. There's only now. Literally, truly, definitively, objectively. All of the things that we think used to happen, they don't exist. The only moment we've ever lived in, ever, and will ever live in, is this moment right now. And when you're afraid of something, you're afraid because of something that will happen but hasn't happened. That's a construction of your mind, and that is your mind clamoring for primacy in existence. Your mind is almost like a virus or an animal that lives inside of you that needs dominance. And so it needs fear and desire and suffering as a mechanism to rationalize its own existence. So all of that is not super helpful. If you're feeling those things, the thing that you need to do is breathe and try to be present, and remember that all the things that you're afraid might happen are just constructions of your mind, and nothing really has ever been as bad as the things that you worry about. Even when they actually happen, they're not really that bad, because most of the time we're not actually worried about, it's not Maslow's hierarchy. We're not really worried about dying on the street most of the time. And most of the time we're just worried about pride or loss of status or, shame, which are all emotions that we create internally. That doesn't mean it's easy. I feel them every single day. It's not easy. But that's the first thing. And the second thing, which I literally did, and I've been doing, is, why is this great? Don't even ask yourself, why is it good? But why is it great? So I know that you run a business, Michael, and I run a business. And if you ever have those existential fears, you ask the question, why is the worst thing that ever happened going to be the best thing that ever happened? And really, and believe it, and believe it. And, I've been through divorce. So I've been, this is my second marriage. And then even in the book, I talk about being separated from my second wife. So clearly I'm not that easy to live with. And, a lot of financial difficulty, and really through 2020, right? So like maybe 2019. So from like 2010, when I got divorced and my first wife took basically all the money that I'd made, through 2019, when I was finally comfortable running Pavilion and it was profitable. But those 7 to 9 years were full of panic the whole time, full of fear and panic. And I guess my point is, like, it didn't really help. And the things that have helped, the things that have turned the ship, are understanding that, again, I'm just paraphrasing, other famous, more important gurus than me, but that, gratitude is the frequency most harmonious with abundance in the world. That, there's this great misconception. And again, it was like Rumi or somebody famous said this stuff. I'm just like, I'm just the vessel, but that everybody, the biggest mistake in the world people make is that they think that by focusing on negativity, they will create positivity. By being afraid of something, that will mean that it is less likely to happen. But what happens is that your energy, your focus, and your attention are like a gravitational well that sucks, that reorganizes the universe towards that outcome. So when you're terrified of going out of business and every day you wake up fearful and you're operating from a place of fear, and maybe you pull back your marketing investments or your growth investments, maybe you fire people that were actually helping you grow, maybe you retreat into yourself and you're not as public and as open, and so people aren't aware of you as much as they used to be when you were feeling comfortable and positive and radiant. All of those things perpetuate and increase the likelihood that your worst fear will actually happen, because that's all you do is spend your time focusing on it. And it's very hard. It's very hard to come to the edge of a cliff and tell yourself that if you look down, you're more likely to fall. And the way that you work backwards from it is to look up. But that's really the only thing that I've ever done that's ever worked.
It's interesting because I was thinking before we started recording, you invited me onto the Sales Hacker podcast a while back, and I was talking about the ego. And it was a sales podcast. I was talking about the ego in sales, and I was talking about selling with less ego. And one of the things there was the 8 different emotions, and one of them was fear, right, which we're talking about here. But interestingly, since we had that conversation, like everything, we've kind of evolved as a business, and we've been thinking, yes, the ego a lot of the time is damaging you in sales, but the ego can be useful in certain situations. If we take fear is going to be damaging. Let's just imagine you want to call a customer, a cold call, any type of call, and you're like, I don't know how the person's going to react because I don't know where they are in the world. I'm not going to make the call. But then you could use that fear to be like, okay, maybe I'm scared because I'm not prepared enough. Let me think about who is this customer, what's going on, what are they doing in this situation. So the reason I'm going into this, I think when it comes to the ego and some of these emotions, and going back to what the start of what you were talking about, when there's a problem, think about how are you part of the problem. But I think there's also, as a business owner, you don't want to beat yourself up too much and think like damage your ego too much, because if we didn't have ego, like we wouldn't get out of bed. So I guess my question for you is like, how do we find that balance of looking at ourselves and thinking, what are we doing wrong here? But then also giving ourselves that self-love, and then, having ego in like a positive sense.
Well, I think starting with, I don't think those things are necessarily exclusive. Saying you might be part of the problem doesn't mean you're bad. It just means it's a more holistic way of approaching what is my role in this situation, which I think can be positive, because to your point, again, I don't think negative thoughts. I don't think saying, hey, I'm part of the problem, that means I suck. I'm not saying the second part. I'm only saying the first part, right? Which is like, I'm contributing to this situation. What can I do to improve it? And that is action oriented. And I think that's to your point. If you're afraid of making a cold call, why are you afraid? And let's unpack it. The problem with most fear is that it triggers that fighter. It triggers paralysis. It triggers this sense of overwhelming, you're flooded with chemicals. Your brain is flooded with chemicals, and you're afraid to take any action at all. And I think we're both saying, hey, how do we step back? How do we use these emotions as motivation to improve and to drive us to improve? So and to your point, I wrote this book called Kind Folks Finish First, but the most important part of it is that the kindness needs to start with yourself. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. This isn't about castigation or punishment. This is about development and empowerment. That's the point. And that's why I said it at the beginning, right? Starting with the idea that you might be the problem isn't that you're bad. It's empowering. It means you can fix it. And I do agree. Again, gratitude is the frequency most harmonious with abundance. People want to be around people that are happy with what they have. And that, I think you're right, that there is this tension between desire and striving and happiness with what you have. And I think a true Buddhist, somebody like the somebody that has actually achieved enlightenment, I think the purpose of it is, they call enlightenment the end of suffering, right? And desire is a form of suffering. Desire is a form of punishing yourself for now not being okay, right? That's what Eckhart Tolle would say, right? You're just creating reasons why this moment is not acceptable, and there needs to be a different moment, which of course never arrives. But I find that there's the way to harness that suffering to make it enjoyable. I think competition can be enjoyable. I think exercise can be enjoyable. I went for a run this morning and I pushed myself a little bit harder because we've got this Strava group for Pavilion now, and I don't want to look slow amongst all my fellow members. And it felt good at the end, and it didn't feel good doing it. So I don't have a perfect answer, but I will tell you that the biggest single change in my life came when I started being nicer to myself. And that was the thing. And I don't see that as exclusive to the first part of, let's start with the idea that you might be the problem. Let's start with the idea that you are contributing to your circumstances and you have the power to change them. That's a different way of saying exactly the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely love that. And one of the other things I was thinking of, because you another concept you mentioned, which has come up on the show, is around like time, and the ever present now, as Eckhart Tolle calls it. And one of the analogies I give is like, if you're ever in a really good concert, or it doesn't have to be a good concept, where there's sometimes moments you have where it almost feels like time stops in a way. So time in itself is a weird concept, but then if you're running a business, right, especially in the Western world, it's like we have to be very calendar driven, and we do have to be the visionaries that are like thinking about the future as well. So there's also that balance of, yes, it's about being present, but then you also got like planning, calendars, time management as well. So like, how do you find that balance?
Uh, with great difficulty. I mean, being present is very hard for me. The way that I've tried to find balance is to, in the same way that pilots have checklists, and again, so first of all, like the fact that I know the answer to the question doesn't mean I embody the answer to the question. I'm not perfect, and I'm not super present all the time, and I'm not always happy, and I'm not always
Yeah.
grateful. I just know that that's what I should be doing. And so I try to create constructs that increase the likelihood that I am present, available, and frankly content and at peace. And so one of the things I have is this thing, like I call it my good day sheet. And my good day sheet is a spreadsheet and now I've made it so that every time I open my browser, every time I open Chrome, it automatically opens. And because again, it was inconsistent, so I wasn't opening it every day. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 things that make a good day, and it's color coded. So read, meaning read a book, not Twitter or X or whatever, or LinkedIn. Write, that means journal, like write something longhand with my hand. Exercise, meditate, drink 4 big cups of water, and be kind to others. And then I try to list out like because it's easy to say, sure, I was kind to somebody yesterday. So I try to like list out exactly, what was the kindness that I felt like I performed, just to keep me focused on like being available. So my point is, like, I try to do all those things every day. Most days I do, some days I don't. And that helps orient me towards like, okay, you're on the path. That's the path. You're always, and the thing that I've been thinking about recently, because again, like I am I don't I'm a true Cancer, meaning I was born in July, and that's my zodiac sign, and I embody it, right? Which means I'm very moody, and I'm flooded with and if we closed a big sale or we signed up a bunch of members in a day, I'm jumping off I'm bouncing off the walls. I'm so happy. And if there's a big cancellation notice, or the cash accounts are low, or I get a call from somebody that I don't like, I can be overwhelmed by waves of despair in really instantly, almost instantly. They are like waves. They're like big clouds that flow through my body and my brain. And so the point is that like I can be super, super up and down, but but what I remember is, and again, it's been especially true in 2023, it's first of all, the day ends, you have a hard day, you can go to sleep, and probably you'll wake up and probably things will be different. And sleep really is restorative in that way. And then the second thing is you're always one decision. That's Eckhart Tolle's point. Eckhart Tolle's point is like, you don't need a rabbi or a priest or a shaman. You don't need to go to, divinity school. Like, there's nothing keeping you from divinity but you. And you can have it in this moment right now, 12:27 p.m. Eastern, Friday, September 1st, 2023. You can have it if you want it. And that's really reassuring to me that, again, I yesterday I was traveling to Charlotte, and then I didn't eat very well in the airport, and then I had 2 bourbons on the plane, and I just wasn't feeling very healthy yesterday. Well, today it's 60 degrees Fahrenheit, so it's like 15 degrees or 14 degrees, something like that, Celsius. So it's like really beautiful. And I went for a run, and then I went for a swim in the ocean, and I had a great coffee, and I walked my dog, and everything, and that's it. And now I feel like I'm oriented in the right way. And I think that's part of it. Part of being on the path is knowing you're never far from it.
Yeah.
Part of, the people that get into bad situations, bad habits, they feel like, if you weigh, $500, 500 pounds or whatever kilos, you're like, well, why would I start dieting now? What good does it do to weigh 498? And the people that make it to whatever their goal weight is are the people that say, no, there's benefit to 498. And after that, I'll get to 496, et cetera, et cetera. So Anyway.
Yeah, it's like the whole atomic habits, right? Which is something
Yeah,
that's becoming a big thing now. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, I find that as well. If you do one small thing, like for me, it's like if I work out in the morning, then on the way to the gym, I'll be listening to like a meditation and working on my breathing, and then I'll feel better at work and I want to eat healthier, and it's that whole spiral. I wanted to come on to your book and about kindness in business, which I think is a kind of nice topic for the show, the Cosmic Bridge. So obviously you've talked a little bit today around like treating yourself with kindness. Imagine that was a bit of an inspiration. But yeah, what inspired this book? Why did you decide to write it?
Well, I was my coach that I talked to every Saturday said that the Pavilion grew a lot during COVID, and there was a lot of people that had success during COVID, and there was a lot of people that did not have success. And he said, a lot of people haven't had success, and you should write a book to inspire people because it's possible to build a company based on values and still achieve success. That was that was that was really the reason that I wrote it. Now, you know, uh, the funny modifier I have is kind folks finish first in a zero interest rate environment. And when everybody thinks they're a genius when money is free. I'm not saying that the lessons of the book are not as relevant as they are to but it's easy to be generous when everything's going great. And really, the test of values and the test of ethics is when things aren't going great and how you perform and how you behave. And that's why this year and the past 18 months have been a bigger test than the period, even during COVID, because again, COVID was managed by the central banks to flood the zone with free money, and it worked to a certain degree. But I think we've been experiencing the hangover effects, although I think we might be coming out of it. Hopefully the Klaviyo IPO will help stimulate people's animal energies. But that's why I wrote it. I wrote it because I'm trying my best. That's what I would say. I'm trying my best. And I think people believe it's really easy to learn to say the world is this way. The world is dog eat dog. The world is everybody's going to screw you and you got to get yours before they get theirs. And, there's only 3 hot dogs left. I should take 2 just in case I get hungry, even though there's 5 people behind me. There's a world where people believe that grabbiness and transactional behavior is evolutionary, is the only. It's not. They don't want to be that way. They just assume that they're going to get screwed if they're not. And the point of the book is to articulate to people that it is possible to be successful without being transactional, that it is possible. And you can have different definitions of success, and certainly I'm some people might think I'm successful and some people not. And compared to, a billionaire, I'm definitely not. But I think that's the point. The point of the book is to say there is a different way. There is a different way. And it's I guess the last thing I'll say is like that the publishers, when we were talking about the book, they said, well, should it really be called like kind folks finish first? Shouldn't it be called like the kindness principle or kindness? Because they said it's not really about competition. It's not about finishing first. It's about embodying the spirit of kindness, regardless of the competition. And I said, no, you've got it completely wrong. That's not true. This is a practical formula for competitive success, right? This is a formula for differentiation. Everybody else is transactional. That's why it's competitive, because you are employing a different strategy. And by employing a different strategy, you are differentiating yourself. You are positioning yourself as unique. And that uniqueness will accrue attention and influence and power and prestige to you. So my point is like, it's not that it's cynical. It's that it's saying this is a long-term strategy, not a short-term strategy, but it's still a strategy.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I was going to follow up with a question around, you mentioned the word practical there. So how can people be practically kind? So there's 2 ways this could be. One, you're just working in a business. How can you be kind to your colleagues? And then 2, as a leader, right? If you're running a team or running a company, how can you what are some practical things you can do to be kinder to your staff?
Well, I don't necessarily. Kindness and niceness are not the same thing. And so, kind, I believe, I think there's a lot of parallels to like Kim Scott's radical candor. I mean, kind is doing what you say you're going to do. Kindness, and in this context, the principles that we try to embody, right? Give to get, look to help others before you help yourself, build relationships, not transactions, focus on a big, long game, not a short, small game. So that doesn't
Yeah.
just mean being kind to your employees. It means them being kind to you too. So what does that mean? I mean, kindness in first means like, let's look for people to help. That could be one way to be kind, right? Let's look for ways to help people that where you're not going to charge any money. Let's go through the Rolodex and figure out, are there people that need jobs? Let's make connections for them. Let's spend a bit of time every week making introductions to people that need a resource with people that have that resource. Then
Yeah.
let's not say that every time I make an introduction, I need 5% or 10% of whatever happens from that introduction. Let's assume that, in fact, by not asking for that 5% or 10% of that referral fee, I look different. I look better, right? And that I look like somebody that doesn't need the 10%. In fact, it makes people want to do more business with me. And let's assume that maybe by so doing, I can create other optionality for myself and other ways of creating positivity in the universe or benefit. That would be a few examples of kindness. As it relates to working with your team, I think kindness is setting very clear expectations and holding people accountable to them. And you might say, well, that doesn't sound very kind. And I'm saying, no, I think it is kind, because I think the opposite is unkind. The opposite is, I think it's unkind to withhold information or feedback from people if they could use it to improve their behavior. I think it's unkind to allow people to perform below their potential and not tell them that they're capable of doing more or being better. So
Yeah, definitely relate to that. I think when I started my business, even in other companies where I had leadership roles, I suffered from people pleasing. And I realized that people pleasing is not in the benefit of the person, right? It's there, you actually, if you're giving them feedback openly, that's going to benefit them as well.
yeah, I mean, that it's hard to believe that. And it's hard because, again, remember where we started this conversation, assume you're the problem. Well, sometimes somebody receiving the feedback, that's an enlightened perspective, just to be clear. Assume you're the
Mm.
problem. Most people will not do that. Most people will assume, how many times have we been in a conversation with a friend or a partner or a spouse, right? So and so, what a jerk. And you're right, sweetheart. That person is a real jerk. And you're thinking in the back of your head, maybe I don't know if they're a jerk, but I got to be on the side of my loved one. And my point is, like, most people are not going to assume that other people that they contributed to their situation. It's just way easier to blame somebody else. It's just way easier, and it's against our natural chemistry. At least it's against my natural chemistry. It would have been way easier for me to go into that meeting yesterday in Charlotte and tell the guy to go to hell and that he's an asshole and I was right and he's wrong. And I found myself agreeing with him as I put myself in his shoes. And so the point is, all you can do is your best. All you can do is give them the feedback and try to give it with kindness, right? Give it with compassion. You're not out to get them. You're not out there to make them feel small. It's not an attack on them.
Mm.
We're trying to help them. You might not succeed and they may not believe you, but that is the truth.
Yeah, I was thinking as well, because you made the separation of kindness and nice being nice as well, which I definitely understand that now. So with those two things, so let's imagine you're going to give someone feedback, right? And you're doing it from a place of being kind because you think the feedback you're going to give them is going to make them a better person. They're going to do better work. And even in the future, this is a skill that you're going to help them with. And often what happens in those situations, you go in with the right intentions, but they don't see it that way, right? And they don't see themselves as the problem, like you mentioned. So what do you do in those situations? Because I'm sure a lot of people are listening to this and, I always have the best intentions. I wake up in a good mood. I've done my meditation. I've done my running. I go and meet John and then I try to give him feedback. I want to help him, but he's just like, no, leave me alone. I don't need help. I'm good, right? So how do you react to those situations?
Well, codependence is I can only be okay if you're okay, right? That's what codependence means. Codependent relationships is if my wife's unhappy, I have to be unhappy. That's what it means. So my point is, all you can do is your best, and you have to remove the attachment. part of people, you say, I want to give John feedback because I want to feel good about myself. And if John doesn't accept the feedback in the way that I hope that he would, I can't feel good about myself. And now there's a problem and a conflict because John's standing in the way of me and how I want to see myself. And all you can do is your best. If John tells you to go fuck yourself, so be it. All of life comes down to judgment, right? Everything in life is, yes, there's a million different principles and a million different rules, and each one of them can be applied in a different way in this particular situation to tell you to go right, left, or straight. And what are you going to do? And that's what life is your ability to make that. So my point is, hey, is God watching to say, you know what, Michael, I know that you think you gave that feedback in the spirit of kindness, but you didn't. Or actually, John was too sensitive and he should have. There's nobody that's going to say that. There is no objective reality. Reality is an illusion constructed by our brains, right? Everything flows. We're not even seeing what we see, right? Like that's not, we assume that we're like living in our eyeballs. That's not what's happening. Light's coming in and hitting these receptors, and then it's flowing into our brain, and our brain constructs the image after the fact. But we're not like living in our skin. This is data bits that come. So my point is like all of it's fake. So all you can do is do your best. Ask yourself, did you really offer that in the spirit of kindness and compassion? Did you feel that sense of antagonism, that sense of conflict, that sense of was there a status component to you giving that feedback? And if you can honestly say there might have been, but I was really doing my best, and he still freaked out and went apeshit on me and, threw that cup at me and, tried to slap me, you could say, that sounds like his problem, not mine. I did what I could.
You mentioning some interesting things here around, like our reality and what we see being an illusion. How did you come to some of these conclusions? Was it through reading people like Eckhart Tolle? I guess what was more of your spiritual journey?
My spiritual journey is the fundamental thing that I believe is that I don't know what the fuck is going on in this crazy thing called reality. That's like, I start from there. Now I've, read enough like Stephen Hawking and other physicists, and they talk about, I think it's called the anthropic principle, not the anthropomorphic, but it is basically like, if there was going to be a planet that had hospitable, like the winner of the lottery ticket always assumes that it was divine fate when it was just chance, but the only reason that you're alive to comment on it is because of the fact that you won the lottery, which is all a way of saying, I understand all of the logical conceits around why maybe there's no God or there's no overarching energy at play, but it all seems pretty wild to me. And so that's kind of like where I start from, that place of like, I guess I start from there. Yeah. I mean, my journey has been that basic idea that like, this is all so improbable and so beautiful and so cool and fascinating. And that's like that's an interesting, good place to be. And then from there, it's like, well, what do you do with that? And, bottom line is like, you try to have fun, enjoy the ride. I mean, it sounds a little trite, but that's kind of where, I guess the other thing I would say that has had a big impact on me is that, which like is a little bit Eckhart Tolle and a little bit a bunch of other people, is just this concept of, what do they call it? Panpsychism, which is basically like, the history of science primarily has been like the history of assuming that like this vestige that we have, right? Like that, like our human bodies, like that we are objective observers of reality. Therefore, when we construct our measurements and our tests, we're not, Bernoulli or Heisenberg, we're not impacting it, right? Like we are observing it. And there is an objectively, I think Aristotle talks about this, but quantum mechanics tells us there is no objective truth on reality. Like we assume that like things are the way they are and they behave that way, and we can just observe them and measure them. But what struck a chord with me. I heard this podcast with Sam Harris and somebody talking about panpsychism, which is basically the idea for me. But it's, again, this is your fault, Michael, because you called it the Cosmic Bridge podcast. I didn't call it that, so you did it. So so my point is like, any number multiplied by 0 is 0. And the problem of consciousness is like the problem of at what point can you say that a thing becomes alive? And you're like, well, is a dog alive? Does a dog have a soul? It certainly seems like I've got 3 dogs right there. They're all distinct personalities. They're all like different, but one of them's scared of this, the other's scared of that. So it seems to me they have a soul, So then it's like, okay, well, at what point does it like not have a soul? Does a snail have a soul? And then you're like, okay, so maybe you're like, yeah, snail definitely doesn't have a soul, but a dog does have a soul. You're like, so is there like a meter that like at some point this collection of atoms and this collection of carbon and all of these elements, because we're all made of like the same stuff that was in the Big Bang, like is there some point at which like the light just flips on? Well, that doesn't really make sense, because the most likely thing logically would be that it's a continuum, right? Like that it builds up, and that we are like an acute articulation of consciousness, but that we are on a spectrum of consciousness, not that like we are conscious and everything else is unconscious. So then you think that, and you're like, well, then the only logical explanation is that like that consciousness itself is a fundamental property of the universe, because that's the only way you could like have it accumulate in incremental or infinitesimal amounts, that it would slowly accumulate into something like us that would have a point of view on things. Which anyway, so where does that leave me? That just leaves me that like the world is beautiful, God is a real thing. I don't understand any of it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's what you going back to. I think one of the things you said at the start, and you say in your book, like because you had the dilemma of does a dog have a soul, does a snail doesn't, right? But I think it's like it's all connected. It's all connected through God consciousness, whatever you want to call it. Last questions, I always ask this question, which is like, what advice would you give to your younger self? Now, normally, I used to ask that a bit of a vague question if we like in sales. It's not a specific question. So normally I now go back to a specific moment in time. I thought what could be interesting, not done this before, is go back to a time quite recently, like you said, 31st of December, and you're looking at the accounts payable, and there's that fight or flight. So what would you give advice to Sam Jacobs on New Year's Eve on 2022?
Oh, I would like to go back just a bit further than that if I could.
Go for it. Go for it.
I would go back to April, I believe it was April 3rd, 2021. It would just be business advice. But again, all of it's like, how can you give yourself business advice from experiences that you've gained? How would I know to gain them, So but what's the advice? The advice is for any founder, we changed the name from Revenue Collective to Pavilion. And we did that to increase optionality. And we opened up our membership, which is why you asked me about this, to non-leaders. And we went in a few different directions that felt natural at the time. And my biggest advice to every early stage founder, I mean, I'm not running Klaviyo, or I'm not running $100 million business or a $500 million business or $1 billion business. So I can't say for those businesses, but for most early stage companies, they are way too focused on optionality. And I implore everybody to be as focused as you can be. That markets are big, and just if you have something that's working, don't change it. Just keep doing it and doing it and doing it. And don't get distracted or confused or pulled apart.
Love it. Well, yeah, it's been a pleasure having you on, Sam. Learned, as you said, the cosmic bridge. I'm to blame for going down these rabbit holes, but it's been good going down some rabbit holes with you.
Well, thanks for having me, Michael. And if anybody wants to continue the conversation, you can email me, sam@joinpavilion.com.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Sam. So it's great having Sam on today. Had multiple chats with him about sales and marketing, but getting into some of the stuff in the background with him was super interesting. And going back to the start of the show, my main takeaway is his point around make the assumption that you might be the problem, right? And if we go back to his answer to this, he said this is actually empowering because it means you have a lot more control of your life than you think. So it doesn't mean you're bad or anything like that. So if you thinking to yourself, if you're a problem in a situation, that's not a bad thing. It means you're trying to improve yourself and you've got control over your life and you can make it better. So I think that's a really great takeaway from Sam. As always, if you think someone could use that advice, send it to them, send them a link to the podcast, or just generally, if you think whatever Sam said, if it resonated with anyone, share it on your social media, and then subscribe to us on YouTube, all the podcast platforms, and we'll see you next week.